Hey everybody, it's Mr. Stafford, and this is video one in a three-part series of how the American Revolution impacted different groups living in North America, in and around the North American colonies. And so we're going to start with Native Americans. So I want to take you back to the Proclamation of 1763. So if you remember, right after the French and Indian War, the king had said no westward movement past the Appalachian Mountains, and the colonists were very upset about this. What you need to remember is the colonists kept moving west of the Appalachian Mountains anyway, and there was a lot of conflict with Native Americans. So this is an ongoing conflict in the years leading up to the American Revolution. Who's moving west? Well, it's people who are settling that territory, but also land speculators, and that's important. So let me explain what a land speculator is. If you have some money and access, you might want to invest it. And so there are wealthy individuals, the Founding Fathers included in this group, that saw the land west of the Appalachians was cheap right now because there was Native Americans out there. It wasn't largely settled. There weren't a lot of developed resources. And so you could buy land cheap if you thought that down the road it would become more valuable. And so that's what land speculators were doing. They were buying up this cheap land in the hopes that the nation would actually move west, and then that land would increase in value. All right, so you've got Native Americans and colonists already battling in this Ohio River Valley. And remember, that's kind of the impetus for the French and Indian War. Now fast forward to the American Revolution. All right, so as the American Revolution is taking place and the colonists are fighting against the British for control, can you guess who the Native Americans might want to win? Well, it's going to depend on which Native American groups you're talking about. Right? But you can imagine how some Native Americans who are tired of fighting the colonists in the backcountry on the western side of the Appalachian Mountains might support the British cause. I'd also see how the colonists might work to develop treaties with some Native Americans and enlist them on their side. So the reality is Native Americans were split. They looked at their own interests and thought what was best for them and decided which side to take in terms of the revolution at that point. British and the colonists did their best to enlist the Native Americans to support their cause as well. This is an image that is showing a British soldier that is paying for the scalps of patriots, right? So there's this sense that the Native Americans are kind of up for hire, and the colonists are trying to persuade them to fight on their side, and the British are trying to persuade them to fight on their side. Let's talk about what happens to Native Americans after the American Revolution. As the British are kicked out, the Native Americans find themselves in conflict with the new United States government, right? Almost immediately, as the United States government wants to then allow the citizens now of the United States to move west of the Appalachian, leading to conflict. During and after the war, the American officials authorized the burning of Indian villages, the capturing and enslaving of Indian combatants. Native American leaders said after the war that American independence was the greatest blow that could ever have been dealt them. So after the war, remember, these states, these new states, are creating independent, democratically accountable governments, which means they're going to be accountable to voters. And those voters are the people of the states who are coveting that Indian land. In fact, many thought that this was part of the spoils of war, that they would now have access to that territory. So while the colonists were experiencing new heights of freedom and democracy, the impact on the Native American groups in the nearby towns and villages was the inverse of that. They were now being threatened in ways that they hadn't because the British government had prohibited that westward movement. So I want you to be thinking about the impact of the American Revolution now on the Native Americans, right? How revolutionary was the Revolutionary War and its ideals of freedom and democracy and equality for the Native Americans, who are now considered enemy combatants to be removed? This is also where we're going to see the beginnings of a policy of removal. George Washington is going to favor a policy of removing Native Americans to territories west of the Mississippi. The thinking being that that's largely unoccupied territory. There are actually a lot of other Native American tribes out there, but that this unoccupied territory could be a home for these Native Americans that were being displaced by this new United States government. So the big picture question for this week is, how revolutionary was the American Revolution? We need to think about what that term revolutionary means and how it applied to Native Americans. Is this a revolutionary movement from a Native American perspective, from American colonial perspective, from a British perspective, from everybody within the colonies? That's what we're looking at this week. Okay, so remember, the American Revolution is going to impact different groups in different ways. I want you to take a moment now to move on to video number 2 in this series, and that is about the impact of the American Revolution on women as a group. Thanks for watching.